Howdy, I'm Brett here with mamasmiths.com, mamasmiths.com. And what I'm going to show you is part one of building a Lego table. So my girls are super into Legos. The problem being they end up all over the floor and all over the place. Anybody who's ever stepped on a Lego before knows that it's the worst torture known to humankind. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a table that they can play with their Legos, keep their Legos in, but also I want to make it convertible. So I'm going to put a top on it so that when we're not using it for Legos, it can be used as a craft table or snack table, something like that. So part one today, we're just going to do the dry fit, the frame. So you see here it's all together. This is just dry fit, no glue, nothing like that, just held together with some screws. And I'll break it down, deconstruct it, and then in part two we'll finish up, put the finishing touches, the top, the tabletop, and the play mat on it. So what the goal here was, I bought some of these Lego compatible tiles online on Amazon. They're about 6 inches square. So what we're going to do is we're going to put them all together. We're going to lay them all out. I got 12 of them, so we're going to do a 3x4 grid of these. So we laid them all out. I measured them up. They're about 6x6. So it's going to be about 18 inches by 24 inches when it's all together. So we're just designing this and developing this as we go. But I sat my girls down in some chairs, some kids' chairs, had some other kids' tables, and I got some rough height estimates about where I want it to be on height, so the girls can stand and play with it and sit and use it as a table, and that will grow with them for a little bit. So overall here, I'll just do a quick drawing of what we're planning on doing, but we're just going to make this table like this. Now I want to add a little taper to the legs. It just gives it a little bit of a nicer, cleaner look. So this is what we're going to end up doing all together. So I decided that the best height here is going to be 22 inches. So additionally, I'll show you how I came up with the measurement here, but this height here is going to be 4.5 inches. So all together, we'll take a look at that, and we're going to make it about 30 inches in length. And then the other side here, which we'll take a look at later, but that's going to be 25 inches. So I know, I'll show you how I do the legs, but I know I need to start off with the legs at 22 inches altogether. So let's take a look at those. So the first thing I did was I cut 8 of these, 22 inches. All I'm using here is 1-inch dimensional pine, just cheap pine, because it doesn't have to be anything super fancy for them, because they're kids, you know, they don't need a lot, and they're going to play with it pretty hard. So I made 22 inches long. Now I said I wanted to put a little taper on it, so I drew it up. Start off with my 4.5 inches. That's going to be the flush mount here with that top. So I want 4.5 inches where I don't put a taper on it. And then I decided I'm just going to cut it back about 3/4 of an inch overall. So I just drew a straight line. I measured out 3/4 of an inch here and drew a straight line up to my 4.5 inch mark. So I cut that down on the table saw. If you've never done a taper before, one thing I recommend is just building a very, very simple jig. So a piece of plywood, a couple other scrap boards. You run the plywood through the table saw, and then you line up your line here that you want to cut on a taper. You line it up with the edge of that piece of plywood that you just sent through the table saw. Sandwich it in with a couple of boards here, scrap boards, and now every time I run this through that exact same table saw, it's going to cut off that taper. So I did that 8 times, ended up with 8 of my leg boards with the taper on them. You can see right here, that's got the taper I already cut off. Now let's take this apart a little bit and I can show you a little bit more. Alright, so I've taken it apart here, and you can see our original board that I left, that's 4.5 inch strip there. And this is a 1x3 in case I didn't say that. So it's 2.5 inches wide here altogether. So here's what one of those boards looked like after I cut the taper off. Now what I want to do is make a right angle for each leg. So that's why I have 2 per corner, or 8 boards I cut all together. But you can see here that when I use the other side, here's the normal full side. When I use the other side, it adds 3/4 of an inch from the other board. So what I did was I took 4 of those 8 boards that you can see have all identical tapers to them. Okay? And I just ripped off 3/4 of an inch. Use my table saw, I set it to 3/4 of an inch, and I ripped off that, and it left me with a 3/4 inch strip that I'll actually use for scrap later for other stuff. But when that's all put back together, in our right angle here for our legs, each side is identical in size. So that's why I cut that 3/4 of an inch off. Okay, so I made 8 of those, 4 full width, and 4 with 3/4 inch ripped off. Next, I went and cut all my sides down. So I'm using 4.5 inches, like I said. I wanted it 30 inches by 25 inches. So on each one of those, you have to subtract, how much. This is 2.5 inches, so I had to subtract 2.5 inches on each side of my 30 inches. So I cut a 25-inch board for one length. So once I get the board cut to 4.5 inches, I decided I was going to lay out how I wanted it to be. So what you can see here is I drop 3/4 of an inch down, and that'll be my tabletop. So just a scrap piece of wood here that's 3/4 of an inch, and you can get an idea. Here's going to be the tabletop. So when it's all said and done, you're going to have a nice flush drop-in table. So on top of the tabletop is going to sit on top of a ledger board, and all I did was I got 1.5 inch, this is just scrap, but 1.5 inch pine, and that'll be the ledger that the table will sit on to drop on. Now this next 3/4 of an inch I put here is going to be the play mat. So we'll have a piece of plywood, again 3/4 of an inch plywood, so that'll be the tabletop. So you can imagine if this was looking at the side, looking down at the table, you have the tabletop, the ledger board, the play top, and then for just a good extra measure, I'll throw another ledger board in. So it'll all be sandwiched together. So it's about 4 layers there. So when the girls are playing with it as just a Lego table, it'll just look like this with the ledger board all the way around. And then when you want to convert it into a snack table, craft table, whatever, you're just going to drop the tabletop in. So that's how I came up with the 4.5 inches all together there. Once I got all these sideboards cut, 4.5 inches, and the length I needed, the 30 inches and the 25 inches minus the legs, I drew out the lines and I put some pocket holes in. Now if you've never used pocket holes before, they're a great way to do a project like this. You can buy a pocket hole jig. There's one company called Craig that makes a lot of these. This is a very, very simple version of it. These go for relatively cheap. All you do is you set this up the length you want, you clamp it to your board, and when you drill in with this special drill bit, it comes in. What it does is it creates a step, and it puts the exit hole right in the center of the board, which is where you want it. Now that exit hole, this screw, is going to go in. It's going to go and hit the step that you created in here, and it's going to draw tight any board you have it up against. So it's going to pull itself right into that. See? Now, they also have, more expensive version. Not necessary, but if you can, it's a little bit nicer. In this one, you actually set your board in here, you clamp it down, and again, you're able to drill right in where you want. Either way, ends up with the same result, which is pocket holes. Use your special pocket hole screws, and you just end up putting it all together, screw it all together, and we end up with the table frame that we had before. Okay? So you can imagine this all together. So that's pretty much it for the first part of this, which is the frame, a dry fit. In the second part, what we'll do is we'll glue it all together. We'll screw it tight. I'll put a couple of finish nails in along the sides here to pull those seams up tight. And then we'll create the play mat. We'll put the ledger boards on, and we're going to hide all those screws also. And then we'll create the tabletop that will go on, and then you can sand it, finish it, paint it, stain it, however you want to do it. So thanks for watching. I'm Brett with Mama Smiths, MAMASMITHS.com. We'll put a couple of links at the bottom of this video that'll show where we got the play mats or a pocket hole jig, something like that. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.